before you read another word, ask yourself, have you ever said goodbye to someone while they were still standing right in front of you? Not the angry goodbye of a slammed door, nor the tearful one of a long airport security line. The unforgettable goodbye is quieter. It happens in a crowded room, under the glare of 1,000 cameras, when two people who once shared every secret must suddenly pretend they are strangers. This is not a fairy tale about a prince finding a princess. This is about a prince and his commoner who had to lose each other in public before they could fight for each other in private. It is a story about a man who learned that real strength is not in wearing a crown, but in breaking under the weight of a single, silent farewell. This is the moment goodbye became unforgettable. Document when the early morning light over St. Andrews was pale and cold, the kind of Scottish light that made the old stone buildings look like they were carved from a single block of gray cloud. William Wales, known to his classmates simply as Wills, pulled his jacket tighter around his neck and walked across the damp grass of the university courtyard. He was not a prince here. Not really. Here, he was just another history of art student who had trouble waking up for his 9 o'clock lecture. That was the deal he had made with his father and with the palace. For years of as normal a life as possible. No royal duties. No press briefings. Just essays, cheap beer, and the strange, wonderful freedom of being almost anonymous. He had met Kate Middleton 3 months earlier during their first week. She was not the loudest girl in the room, nor the flashiest, but she had a way of listening that made you feel like the only person in the world. She was from Berkshire, a vicar's daughter's kind of poise, but with a laugh that could fill a cold hallway. They had started as friends the way most real things start. Study groups in the library, walking back to dorms together after late-night parties. He had told her his full name, William Arthur Philip Lewis, and she had simply said, "That's a lot of names for one person." She did not curtsy. She did not gasp. She just smiled. And in that smile, William felt the first real peace he had known since his mother's funeral. Their friendship deepened over the second term. They discovered they both loved the outdoors, both hated the taste of cheap vodka, and both carried quiet sadnesses they did not speak about. For William, that sadness had a name, Diana. His mother's ghost walked everywhere with him, especially on days when the press got too close or when an older relative made a cold remark about royal propriety. Kate never pushed him about Diana. She never asked the questions that reporters asked, the ones disguised as sympathy but sharp as knives. Instead, she would sit with him in silence, her shoulder against his, and let the quiet do its work. That is how love begins, not with a bang, but with a shared silence that feels like home. By the summer of their second year, they had moved into a shared flat with 2 other friends. It was a messy, happy time. William learned that Kate was fiercely organized, the kind of person who labeled leftovers in the fridge. Kate learned that William was hopeless with laundry, but could make a surprisingly good cup of tea. They bickered about whose turn it was to buy milk. They stayed up late watching bad movies. They fell into a rhythm that felt so natural, so unroyal, that William sometimes forgot who he was. But the world outside St. Andrews never forgot. The first crack appeared during a charity fashion show in their 3rd year. Kate had agreed to walk the runway, a silly student event. She wore a sheer dress over a black bikini, nothing scandalous by normal standards. But a photographer from a tabloid was in the audience, and the next morning, the picture was on the front page of every newspaper in Britain. Will's new flame, the headline screamed. Suddenly, Kate Middleton was not just a history of art student. She was the commoner who caught the prince. Her family's private information was dug up. Her old school photos were published. A reporter camped outside her parents' house in Bucklebury. William was furious. He had seen this before. He had watched the press destroy his mother, chasing her car through Paris, hounding her for every tear and every smile. And now they were doing it again, this time to a woman who had never asked for any of it. He called his private secretary and demanded that the palace issue a statement asking for privacy. The palace refused. "Any statement will only make it worse," they said. "It will confirm she is important to you." William threw his phone across the room. Kate found him sitting on the floor, head in his hands. She did not cry. She knelt beside him and said, "I knew what I was getting into." But the truth was neither of them had known. Not really. The pressure built over the next year. Graduation came. William joined the military, as expected. Kate took a job with a party supplies company, and then with her parents' new business. They tried to stay together, but the distance was not just geographical. It was a distance of worlds. William was now an officer, a royal, a man whose every move was watched. Kate was a girl from Berkshire, trying to build a career without being defined by her boyfriend's last name. The press called her Weighty Katie, a cruel nickname suggesting she had no ambition other than to become a princess. They mocked her clothes, her family, her choice of handbag. Every time she went to a grocery store, someone took a picture. Every time she visited William at his barracks, the story was that she was desperate to propose. William tried to protect her. He asked the palace for more security for Kate's family. He was told no. He asked if he could publicly defend her. He was told that would only make the obsession worse. He felt like a man drowning in shallow water, able to see the surface but unable to reach it. Kate, for her part, grew quieter. The laugh that had once filled cold hallways became smaller, rarer. She started canceling plans. She stopped answering her phone as quickly. William knew what was happening. He had seen it before. The slow retreat of someone who is being slowly crushed by a world they never chose. The goodbye came on a rainy Tuesday in the summer of 2007. William drove to the Middleton family home in Berkshire. He parked his black Audi a few houses down, the way he always did to avoid drawing attention. He walked up the driveway, and Kate's mother, Carol, opened the door. Carol's face was kind but tired. She had been waging her own quiet war, protecting her daughter from the press, from the palace, from the sheer weight of being connected to the crown. "She's in the garden," Carol said. William nodded and walked through the house, past the framed photos of family holidays, past the refrigerator covered in children's drawings, into the back garden where Kate was sitting on a wooden bench, staring at a rose bush that had not yet bloomed. She did not turn around when he sat beside her. They sat in silence for a long moment, the way they used to in St. Andrews. But this silence was different. It was heavy. It was full of things they had both been too afraid to say. William spoke first. "I can't watch them hurt you anymore." Kate finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were dry, but her face was pale. "So what are you saying?" she asked, though she already knew. William took a breath. He had practiced this speech 100 times in the car. He had told himself he was doing the right thing, that letting her go was an act of love, not weakness. "I think we need a break," he said. "Not because I don't love you, because I do, and because I'm destroying your life." Kate nodded slowly. She did not argue. She did not beg. She did not cry. That was the worst part for William. If she had screamed, if she had fought, he could have held on to some hope. But her quiet acceptance told him everything. She was exhausted. She was worn down. And she had known this moment was coming for months. "Okay," she said. "Just one word." Then she stood up, walked back into the house, and closed the glass door behind her. William sat on the bench for another 10 minutes, alone with the rose bush and the rain that had started to fall. Then he got up, walked to his car, and drove away. That was the goodbye. No drama. No tears. Just a closed door and the sound of rain on wet grass. And it became unforgettable because neither of them would ever truly leave that bench. Document 2, the weeks after the breakup were a strange, hollow time for both of them. William threw himself into his army training with a kind of desperate energy. He woke at 5 in the morning, ran until his lungs burned, and fell into bed exhausted every night. He told himself he was fine. He told his friends he was fine. But the men in his unit noticed he no longer laughed at their jokes. He no longer looked at his phone with that small, hopeful smile he used to have. He was doing the work, saying the right things, but something behind his eyes had gone dark. Kate, meanwhile, did something unexpected. Instead of hiding, she went out. She had spent years trying to be invisible, trying not to give the press any reason to write another cruel story. But now, with nothing left to protect, she decided to live. She went to nightclubs with her sister, Pippa. She wore short dresses and laughed loudly. She was photographed holding hands with a young man named Henry Ropner, a friend from university. The tabloids went wild. Kate parties while William pines, one headline read. Another called her the rebound princess. But Kate did not care anymore. Or rather, she pretended not to care. The truth was more complicated. Every night out was a performance. Every smile for the cameras was an act of defiance. She was not trying to make William jealous. She was trying to remind herself that she existed outside of him. For William, seeing those pictures was like a slow knife. He had been the one to end things. He had told himself it was for her own good. But watching her laugh with someone else, watching her look free in a way she had never looked with him, made him question everything. He called his best friend, James, late one night from his barracks. "She seems happy," William said, his voice rough. James was quiet for a moment. Then, he said something that William would remember for the rest of his life. "She's not happy, mate. She's surviving. There's a difference." William wanted to believe that. He wanted to believe that Kate was as miserable as he was, because that would mean their love was still real, still alive. But he also knew that he had no right to want her misery. He had let her go. He had to let her be. The autumn passed. William was deployed to the Dorset coast for a training exercise. The work was hard, physical, and consuming. For 8 weeks, he had no phone, no internet, no newspapers. He was just a soldier crawling through mud, learning to lead men in simulated combat. In the quiet moments, lying in his tent at night, he thought about Kate. Not the Kate from the tabloids, the one in the short dresses and the laughing photos. He thought about the Kate from St. Andrews, the one who had sat with him in silence, who had labeled leftovers in the fridge, who had looked at him like he was just a boy and not a prince. He realized in those cold, dark nights that he had made a terrible mistake. He had tried to protect her by leaving, but he had only protected himself. He had been afraid of watching her get destroyed by the same forces that had destroyed his mother, afraid of failing her the way he felt he had failed Diana. But leaving her had not made him brave. It had made him a coward. When he returned to London in December, he looked different, thinner, harder. His friends noticed that he no longer flinched when someone mentioned Kate's name. He did not change the subject. He listened. He asked questions. "Is she okay?" he would ask, and his friends would exchange glances. They had never seen William like this. The old William, the protected prince, would have avoided the topic entirely. This new William seemed to want to feel the pain, to hold it in his hands like a piece of broken glass. Kate, meanwhile, had started to rebuild. She had taken a job as an accessories buyer for a clothing brand called Jigsaw. It was a real job with a real desk and real colleagues who called her Kate, not Weighty Katie. She loved the normalcy of it. She loved taking the tube to work, buying her own lunch, being just another person in a city of millions. But at night, alone in her small flat, she still thought about William. She had dated other men, brief, meaningless things that went nowhere. Every time she kissed someone new, she compared him to William. Every time she laughed at a joke, she missed the way William's eyes crinkled when he smiled. She had told herself she was moving on. But moving on is not the same as letting go. The turning point came on a cold February night. William had been invited to a fancy dress party at a friend's house in London. The theme was hearts and tarts, a silly, romantic thing for Valentine's week. He almost did not go. He was tired of parties, tired of pretending to be happy. But his cousin, Peter Phillips, dragged him along. "You can't sit in your flat forever," Peter said. So William put on a uniform, some costume thing, and went. He did not know that Kate would be there. He did not know that she had been invited by the same friend, that she had almost said no, that she had only agreed to come because her sister had told her to stop being a hermit. They saw each other across the room. The music was loud, the lights were low, but William would have recognized her silhouette anywhere. She was wearing a simple black dress and a small, nervous smile. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, as if pulled by some invisible string, they walked toward each other. The crowd parted without realizing it. The music faded into background noise. They met in the middle of the dance floor, and William said the only thing that made sense. "You look beautiful." Kate looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in 8 months. She saw the new hardness in his jaw, the shadows under his eyes. She saw that he had been suffering too. "You look tired," she said. And then, unexpectedly, they both laughed. It was a small laugh, a nervous release of all the months of tension. But it was real. They talked for 3 hours that night. Not about the past, not about the breakup, not about the press. They talked about normal things. His training, her job, a funny thing that had happened to his brother, Harry, at a pub. They talked the way they used to talk in St. Andrews, before the world had gotten so heavy. And when the party ended, William walked her to her car. They stood in the cold February air, their breath fogging between them. "I never stopped," William said, his voice barely a whisper. "I never stopped loving you. I just got scared." Kate reached out and touched his hand. It was the first time they had touched in 8 months. "I know," she said. "I was scared too." They did not kiss that night. They did not make any promises. They just stood there, holding hands in the dark, and let the silence do its work. The same silence that had brought them together in the first place. The goodbye was still unforgettable. But now it was no longer an ending. It was the beginning of something braver. Document 3: The reunion did not happen overnight. It was not a movie scene with swelling music and a dramatic declaration. It was slower, quieter, and much more fragile. After that night at the party, William and Kate started talking again. At first, it was just text messages. A simple, "How was your day?" A photo of a funny-looking cloud. They were careful, almost formal, as if they were learning each other all over again. Then came the phone calls. Long, late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours. They talked about everything except the future. They talked about their fears, their families, their small daily victories. They talked about Diana, something William had never been able to do with anyone else. Kate listened the way she always had, without judgment, without trying to fix anything. She just let him speak. William knew that if they were going to try again, things had to be different. He could not simply put her back into the same impossible situation and expect a different result. He had to change the situation. So he did something unprecedented. He went to his grandmother, the Queen, and asked for a meeting. Not as a grandson, but as a future king. He sat in her private sitting room at Buckingham Palace, a room filled with clocks that ticked too loudly, and he told her the truth. "I love her," he said, "and if I cannot protect her, I will not continue in this role." The Queen, who had seen empires rise and fall, who had weathered decades of royal scandals, looked at her grandson with a gaze that was both stern and deeply sad. She remembered another young prince, her son Charles, and another woman, Camilla, and the decades of pain that had followed poor decisions. She did not want that for William. "Then, you must protect her," she said. "But you must do it properly, not with walls, with strategy." That conversation changed everything. The palace quietly increased Kate's security. A new media protocol was put in place. Tabloids were warned, privately but firmly, that harassment of Kate Middleton would no longer be tolerated. More importantly, William made a personal commitment. He would no longer hide their relationship. He would no longer pretend she was just a friend. He would stand beside her, openly, and let the world see that he was not ashamed of loving a commoner. In October 2007, just a few months after that party, they were photographed together again. This time, it was not a grainy tabloid shot. It was a clear, deliberate image of them walking hand in hand through a park in London. The message was unmistakable. They were back, and this time, they were not asking for permission. The years that followed were not easy, but they were different. Kate learned to navigate the media with a skill that surprised everyone, including herself. She stopped reacting to the cruel stories. She stopped trying to defend herself. She simply lived her life with dignity and grace, and slowly the tide began to turn. The press stopped calling her Weighty Katie. They started calling her Patient Kate, then just Kate, and finally, the Duchess before she even had the title. She began accompanying William to royal engagements, small things at first, charity visits, and military parades. She learned to smile for the cameras without looking strained. She learned to shake hands with mayors and bishops and weepy grandmothers. She was not born for this life, but she was learning to grow into it. William watched her with a kind of awe. The girl he had met in St. Andrews. the one who had labeled leftovers and laughed in cold hallways, had become a woman of steel and silk. She was gentle but unbreakable. She was kind but never a pushover. And she loved him, not for his crown, but for the boy he had been and the man he was becoming. In November 2010, they went on a trip to Kenya. The palace told the press it was a private holiday. In truth, it was a mission. William had been carrying his mother's sapphire and diamond engagement ring in his backpack for 3 days, waiting for the perfect moment. He found it at a remote mountain lodge, during a sunset that painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. They were alone, no cameras, no staff, no security. Just the two of them and the vast African sky. He got down on one knee, the same knee that had once knelt in prayer at his mother's grave, and he asked her the question he had been wanting to ask since that rainy Tuesday in Berkshire. "Kate," he said, his voice shaking, "will you marry me?" She did not say okay this time, the way she had on the bench. She did not nod quietly. She laughed, a full, joyful laugh that echoed across the valley, and she threw her arms around his neck. "Yes," she said. "Yes, yes, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, the same ring that had belonged to his mother, the same ring that had been photographed 1,000,000 times on a woman the world had lost too soon. And, for a moment, William felt his mother's presence so strongly that he almost turned around. But he didn't. He held Kate instead, and he let the past finally rest. The wedding, on April 29th, 2011, was watched by 2 billion people. But what the cameras did not capture was the quiet moment before the ceremony, when William saw Kate in her dress for the first time. She was not a commoner anymore. She was not a princess either. She was something new, something the royal family had never quite seen before. She was a woman who had been broken by goodbye and had chosen to come back anyway. She had looked into the abyss of public life and had not blinked. William took her hand, and his eyes were wet. "You made it," he whispered. "We made it," she whispered back. And then they walked together into Westminster Abbey, into the rest of their lives. But the true end of the story is not the wedding, is not the titles or the palaces or the waving from balconies. The true end of the story is a small, private moment that happened years later on a rainy Tuesday, the anniversary of that first goodbye. William and Kate were at their country home, Amber Hall, with their 3 children. The rain was falling on the windows, the same kind of rain that had fallen on the bench in Berkshire. Kate was reading a book. William was staring out the window. Without looking at her, he said, "Do you ever think about that day?" Kate closed her book. She thought for a moment. "Every day," she said, "but not as a regret, as a reminder." William turned to look at her. A reminder of what? Kate smiled, the same smile that had filled cold hallways in St. Andrews. A reminder that some goodbyes are not endings. They are just the space you need to grow strong enough to say hello again. And that, more than any royal title, more than any fairy tale, is the real story of William and Kate. A story about 2 people who learned that love is not about never letting go. It is about letting go, surviving the fall, and finding your way back to each other with open hands and braver hearts.